This is a short video that outlines some of the ideas about free-flowing communication and highly reliable teams. One of the things that is really clear about highly reliable teams is that they communicate very well. The thing that I've noted in my experience in surveying lots of organizations and lots of teams is that communication is usually the number one problem. It's the thing that gets in the way, that causes the most number of problems. And you can take a really mediocre team, a team that is very mediocre, and have them perform at a high level if they communicate well. And you can take a lot of really good experts, people who are really good at what they do individually, and if they don't communicate well, they can have disastrous results. So communication is absolutely critical. The other day I was sitting here kind of doing my work, and I looked out that window over there, and there were a group of people redoing the roof on top of my neighbor. Now, we looked down on that neighbor, and so we could see them working all day. Actually, for 2.5 days they worked. There were 6 of them, 4 men and 2 women, and they worked together so incredibly well. It was interesting to me that I couldn't really tell who was in charge and who wasn't. They had full anticipation of each other's needs. And so somebody would be working along, doing a row of things, and they'd get to where they needed another tool. And before they looked around, before they asked for it, before they tried to reach for it, somebody was there with it, handing it to them so that they could keep their rhythm and keep going. It was amazing to me that these 6 people stripped the roof, added a whole bunch of new vents and other things as features, and then completely redid the roof in 2.5 days. Pretty amazing to me because they worked together so well. And when you have that routinely in a surgical team or in a group of with a group of pilots or in a flight cockpit crew, and you can see how a team works together really well. One of the things that you see in a flight cockpit crew, for example, is that they always acknowledge who is doing what. And so, for example, if the co-pilot is flying the airplane and turns it over to the pilot says, the co-pilot says, "I'm turning this over to you," and then the pilot acknowledges that he's turning it over to me and then says, "I've got it now." They have a specific language that they use for this, but there's always that really precise, important way of doing that. So there are 5 aspects of this, and we've talked about this several times, but I think you need more detail. First, communication is a joint responsibility of not just the leaders, but everybody on the team. Everybody owns how that communication is done well. It's not the leader's responsibility or just the leader's responsibility to communicate well. It's everyone's. I have a incident commander named Greg Beveridge, who I really, really like on search and rescue. And one of the things I like about Greg is he does what I call over-communicate. That is that when we are asked to respond to something, he will give instructions immediately. And when I get in my car and call in, the instructions are given very quickly. And then they are repeated later and repeated later. And he said as new people are coming on and new people are responding, he will repeat those instructions several times. Yeah, I might have to hear them several times. I might hear redundancy, but everybody gets a chance to hear them. So you don't show up at an incident going, what's going on here? I'm here in the parking lot, but I don't even know what's going on. I love that kind of him owning that and being responsible for that. But in order to get that, I have to call him. I have to share information with him. I have to push back with him. Those are all really important aspects. So we all own that, and we are all responsible for that. The second thing is there needs to be clear and transparent communication protocols so that you know exactly when and how to communicate. This shows up really big time in technology companies because tech firms are very good at communicating around projects, and they may have some softwares. They may have Slack, they may have GroupMe, they may have other softwares like that they use to coordinate action around that software, around that project, so everybody knows what they're doing. Or it may be in the programming system that they're using. If they're doing program development, there are ways to communicate that say, okay, I've done my part, now it's your turn to do this part on this project. And they all know how to do that. Well, having a clear understanding and transparent understanding of the communication protocols really suggests that you use email for certain things. You use phone calls for certain things. For example, if I give student feedback and it's very difficult and hard feedback, it's a lot better to call on the phone. It's a lot better for them to hear my voice. It's a lot better sometimes to meet in person than it is to get an email that kind of has the bad news in the email. So you learn, and the team learns, and the culture kind of teaches you which channel, which kind of how you use each protocol. In search and rescue, for example, we have a dedicated frequency called the TAC frequency, or the tactical frequency. This is not a radio frequency that is monitored by the dispatchers. We have one frequency that is monitored by the police dispatchers, and anything we do on that frequency is recorded. But on the tactical frequency, it's much more free flowing, and we can kind of chat with each other and talk with each other and kind of work things out. But when we start using that frequency, when we go into operations mode, when we're using lowering somebody on a rope, that's what that frequency is really for, then it suddenly becomes a dedicated frequency for tactical operations. And you have to know as a team member when it's appropriate to be chit-chatty and when it's appropriate to just shut up and let somebody else use that frequency in the right way and the right time. The third thing is team members need to exercise information regulation. That is, you cannot overflow or flood the system with trivia or things that are unimportant. And when you see something that's important, this goes back to the first point about joint responsibility, you say something. And so, for example, if the problem is changing and you're not the leader, you're not the important person, but you can see something that they can't see, then you have to share that and speak out to that idea. The fourth thing is that decision making needs to be based on the best available information. You go with the best available information and you are transparent about that. Now you realize that information is always going to be incomplete. You don't ever have everything you need to know about a decision, but you make it anyway. You go ahead and make that decision anyway. It is inherently incomplete. And then you are clear and articulate about that. In the after-action reviews that I've seen, and we'll talk about those in a later lesson, but in the really good after-action reviews, people will talk about their decisions and why they made that decision, and they'll say, but then at that point, all we knew was this, this, and this, and of course that changed, and we would have made that decision differently if da-da-da-da-da had happened. So those are important things. Decision making needs to be based on the best available information. Finally, the fifth thing is there must be multiple feedback loops. That is, as an individual, I get formal feedback on my performance. I get informal feedback on my performance. I'm constantly getting more feedback on how to do things better. What's another approach? What you might consider or think about. I'm constantly getting that in both a formal and an informal way, because that is how you get better. That is how you enhance learning, and it's certainly associated with learning. So those are the 5 aspects of highly reliable teams and communication and free-flowing communication in those teams. I hope this is helpful in this upcoming lesson. Thanks.